Starting off at our number 10 spot, we have the Long Island serial killer. Also known as the Craigslist Ripper, the LISK is an unidentified suspect who is believed to have taken the lives of 10 to 16 people over the last 20 years. The victims so far that are known have been sex workers who used Craigslist to advertise their work. After the disappearance of Shannon Gilbert, police were searching an area along the Ocean Parkway, and that is when they began to discover the remains of the victims. The first 4 were found in December of 2010, with another 6 being found in March and April of 2011. As of December 2015, the FBI is now officially involved in the investigation. There has been a suspect in the case, but any formal charges have not been laid in terms of these crimes. The most recent evidence in regards to the case was a belt found at the scene of the crime, which may potentially belong to the killer. At the same time, it was announced that new scientific evidence was being used in the investigation, but these announcements came just last year, so we have yet to receive any further updates. Hopefully this case is solved quickly so that the family of the victims can receive justice and this terrible person is off the streets for good. In our number 9 spot today, we have The Watcher. In the summer of 2014, Derek and Maria Broaddus had just bought their new 6-bedroom, $1.3 million home in Westfield, New Jersey, and began to do some renovations prior to them moving in. While sorting through some of the mail, they found a small white envelope addressed to, quote, the new owner, so they opened it up and began reading. The letter started off with warm greetings, but quickly turned strange. The couple knew the letter was directed to them because it had mentioned the vehicle they drove, the couple's children, as well as the writer's distaste for the renovations that were being done. If this letter wasn't already creepy enough, it was signed off as The Watcher. I cannot explain to you guys how quickly I would have had that house back up for sale if I received this letter. Over the next few weeks, the family continued to receive more letters from The Watcher, and the letters began to include more personal information. The couple was unsure of where to go or if they should continue their move into this new house, to which I would say, absolutely not. People began to speculate who the Watcher could be, but there was no concrete evidence, and to this day, we still don't know. In our number 8 spot today, we have Amy Lynn Bradley. On March 21st, 1998, Amy and her family boarded the Rhapsody of the Seas, which was a Royal Caribbean cruise. On March 24th, after a fun night on the ship, Amy was hanging out and having a couple drinks with the ship's band, and one of the members explained that she parted ways with them around 1 a.m. After this, around 5:15 a.m., Amy's father said he saw her sleeping on the cabin balcony. Unfortunately, however, once 6 a.m. rolled around, she wasn't there anymore, and this was the beginning of the mystery. Once it was realized that Amy was missing, extensive searches were launched for full days before they ended up being called off when no signs or traces of Amy had been found. While this is all super mysterious and nobody really had anything to go on, the plot only thickens with this story. After her disappearance, people began to report seeing Amy. One sighting was by Canadian tourists in 1998 who said that they had seen a woman who resembled Amy and who had tattoos that matched hers on a beach. A member of the United States Navy said that he saw her in a brothel and said that she told him her name was Amy and she asked for help, saying she wasn't allowed to leave. The most recent alleged sighting comes in 2005 when a woman claimed she saw Amy in a department store in Barbados. She said that Amy entered the restroom with 3 men who then threatened her if she didn't follow through on some sort of a deal. The men left briefly and the witness said the woman turned to her and said her name was Amy and that she was from Virginia and needed help, but the men returned right after to take her away again. This story is devastatingly sad and has so many turns, and to this day no one knows exactly what happened to Amy or if these witness sightings were accurate at all. In our number 7 spot today, we have Lester Eubanks. If you're a fan of unsolved mysteries, you might be familiar with this story. Lester is a man who was convicted and sentenced to prison in 1966 for taking someone's life. In December of 1973, Lester was part of an honor assignment that gave him the opportunity to be at the mall to do some Christmas shopping. While at the mall, he ended up escaping custody and has been on the run ever since. Through investigations into his family and friends, police were led to a center for troubled youth where he was said to have been working, but Lester was nowhere to be found when they got there. The most recent development in this case came recently in 2019 when Lester's biological son agreed to give a DNA sample which could be used to link Lester to recent crimes and maybe give an idea on where he could be hiding, but FBI FBI policy says you cannot search using a family member's DNA. It's crazy that someone could be on the run for that long without anyone recognizing or finding them, and it makes me really wonder if anyone in his new life knows about his dark past. In our number 6 spot today we have Jim Gray. Jim Gray was an incredibly important computer scientist who was responsible for many computer advancements that changed things for all of us. Other than being a computer scientist, he was also an experienced and skilled sailor, and one day on January 28, 2007, he set sail for a short trip so he could head out and spread his mother's ashes as she had recently passed away. As he began his trip, Jim spoke to his wife on the phone and said he would call her once he got back in range. After their phone call, he called his daughter as well and left a little message for her, and then he was off on his trip, but unfortunately he never ended up returning. Jim's wife, Donna, was the one who raised the alarm bells as she was away on a trip, but like I mentioned, Jim said he would call her later, and he never did. This is the point when the huge searches begin. Thousands of images of the area where Jim or his boat might be were uploaded to the Amazon Mechanical Turk for people to look through and see if they could find any kind of signs, but to no avail. Jim also had an automatic emergency position indicating beacon on his ship, but whatever happened to Jim and the ship clearly didn't meet the requirements, or perhaps it had some sort of malfunction, or maybe it was even turned off. To this day, no one knows what happened to Jim or his boat, as no sign or trace of either has ever been found. The theories of what may have happened are endless and range from Jim intentionally disappearing to him being kidnapped for his computer skills and brain in order to do some kind of inside job, and literally everything in between. There most definitely are theories that are seemingly more likely than others, but at the end of the day, they are all a possibility. In our number 5 spot today we have Patricia Meehan. This is a story that really gives me the creeps because it's just so strange. On April 20th, 1989, Patricia Bernadette Meehan was in a car accident on Highway 200 near Circle, Montana. Witnesses saw her driving her car on the wrong side of the road, which led to her crashing into an off-duty police dispatcher, Carol Heights. Carol was luckily uninjured in the crash and got out of her vehicle right away. Upon exiting her vehicle, Carol saw Patricia also exit her vehicle, walk up to her, and just stare at her without saying a word. Patricia then walked away, climbing over a fence, and stood staring at the accident before walking away and then disappearing. Like, I have goosebumps just talking about this right now, I'm not even joking, it's the weirdest thing. A search began immediately but turned up little results. There have been thousands of reported sightings of Patricia that have potentially given police leads to her whereabouts, but she still has never been found. In our number 4 spot today we have Lauren Spirer. On June 3rd, 2011, in Bloomington, Indiana, 20-year-old university student Lauren disappeared after a night out with friends. Lauren was from Greenburgh, New York, but had been attending Indiana University. A few hours after being seen leaving her apartment, her boyfriend texted her, only to receive a response several hours later from an employee of a bar who had found her phone. Not much is known about Lauren's disappearance, but it said she left her apartment at around 12:30 a.m., stopped at the bar where her phone was found, and was last seen around 4:30 a.m. leaving a friend's off-campus apartment. Over the course of the years, Lauren's family has tried following every lead they have to find out what happened to her, but have yet to find the answers that they deserve. In our number 3 spot today we have George Smith. George Allen Smith and his wife Jennifer Hagel Smith had just married and were aboard the MS Brilliance of the Seas, which is a Royal Caribbean cruise ship, as they were doing a Mediterranean cruise for their honeymoon. On July 5th, 2005, the ship was somewhere just off of the coast of Turkey when it was discovered that George had disappeared. The night he was last seen, he was intoxicated from both alcohol as well as prescription drugs, and there was blood evidence found in his cabin as well as on the side of the ship. There were two main theories in regards to his disappearance, the first being that his intoxication led to him falling overboard the ship, and the other was that perhaps a robbery had gone bad and foul play had been involved. This case was investigated for over a decade, with even the FBI and their mafia division getting involved at one point, but despite this, neither George, his body, or what really happened to him has ever been found. There have been many assumptions made over the years, but 16 years later it is still a mystery. In our number 2 spot today we have the cattle crimes. Okay, so for this one there were some documents that became declassified, and this is when they revealed this really grim FBI investigation that took place in the mid-1970s at the request of US Senators Floyd Haskell of Colorado and Carl Curtis of Nebraska. I guess there was some weird sort of connection between these horrific things being done to cattle across as many as 21 states. In a letter from 1975, Senator Haskell was able to identify 130 of these strange, macabre cases in Colorado alone. All of the cases were eerily similar, which is really unsettling considering the details. In most of these cases, the cattle would have their left ear, left eye, rectum, and reproductive organs all missing. All of the blood was drained from the carcasses, but there was no blood on the ground around them, nor were there any footprints. How absolutely horrifying is that? Some people chose to believe that the cause for these was mysterious helicopters and UFOs, but there's a letter from Senator Curtis to the FBI director that says, quote, "The series of incidents stretching from Oklahoma to Nebraska in which cattle have been dismembered in some kind of strange witchcraft cult." I'm not gonna lie, I don't think UFOs or witches did it. It wasn't until 1979 that the FBI was granted jurisdiction to begin investigating these weird happenings, and when they did, they determined that most of the instances were a result of, quote, "normal predator and scavenger activity." And while that answer sounds a little fishy at best, the documents went forward to reveal that not all of the instances could be accounted for. Also, the idea of it being a completely normal scenario also contradicts reports that say that the techniques used in these horrible instances were very professional and sometimes even referred to as being conducted with surgical precision. I'm sorry, but a wolf or a coyote or a bear or whatever predator you want to say did this, ripping apart its meal isn't exactly a surgically precise operation. No arrests were ever made, and while it was deemed solved, a ton of mystery still surrounds these stories to this day. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Yuba County Five. On February 24th, 1978, 5 men from Yuba City, California attended a basketball game at California State University. All 5 men went missing after this night, and several days later, the group's car was found abandoned in a remote area of the Plumas National Forest that was way out of the way from where they would have been. There was no reason for the car to have been abandoned because it was in totally fine working condition when it was found. In June of 1978, 4 of the men were found passed away near a trailer camp that was deep in the forest, but the 5th man has still never been found. There is a lot of strange information about this case, such as how one of them starved to death even though he was surrounded by food. There's truly too much to cover about this story that I unfortunately don't have time for, so if you're interested, I would highly recommend looking up this case, as it truly is unexplainable and just totally terrifying. There's a really great recent My Favorite Murder episode where Karen really dives into this story if you want to hear more.
Starting off this countdown, we have the drug lord. Ismael Zambada Garcia, otherwise known as El Mayo, is a wanted drug lord whose cartel controls much of the heroin production and shipment from Mexico into the US. They also traffic cocaine as well. He has been wanted since 1998. That's when the bounty on him was $2.8 million. Now it's been raised to $15 million. So the government and FBI want this guy badly. But as of now, they have had no success capturing him. In our 9th spot, we have Anonymous. Over the years, the hacktivist group Anonymous has exposed a number of large corporations and government officials. They even have exposed the FBI. One of the times being quite recently during June of 2020. Following the killing of George Floyd and the protests, Anonymous leaked hundreds of gigabytes of law enforcement files. Over 269 gigabytes of data were taken from over 200 law enforcement agencies. This included emails, audio recordings, videos, documents. In total, there were millions of files leaked. Some of the leaked documents showed that the FBI was monitoring the social media accounts of protesters, and they were also alerting local law enforcement about anti-police messages. Other documents showed that the FBI was tracking Bitcoin donations to protest groups, as well as highlighted some scandals and police misconduct. Now, some members have been taken down, but the FBI definitely wants the whole group taken down. I mean, what's next on their agenda? In our 8th spot today, we have the poisoning of Alexander Litvinenko. Alexander Litvinenko was a former Russian federal security officer. In 2006, he was poisoned by radioactive polonium-210. He died several days later, and his killer was never caught. Now, before his death, Alexander saw the corruption within the Russian government and he fled to the UK. And that's when he became a huge enemy of Putin, and that's probably why Putin had him killed. He was out revealing a bunch of Russian government secrets. So of course the FBI wants to know who killed him. Now, things have changed a lot. Russia invaded Ukraine, so I can't say if that's still on the FBI's list anymore. In our 7th spot, we have the Jeff Davis 8. Between 2005 to 2008, a number of women's bodies were found in swamps and canals of Jefferson Davis Parish, Louisiana. The women all had connections with each other since they knew each other, and they were all involved in the local drug trade or sex work, and they all died the same way. They were also all said to be police informants. At least they told people close to them that they were. Anyways, their killer has never been caught. Now, of course, there's a number of theories. One is that they all witnessed the death of a drug dealer at the hands of police during a raid gone wrong, and that's why they were killed. The police killed them to cover up the crime. Now, that's the main theory that their families believe, whereas others believe that they died at the hands of a serial killer. No one knows for sure, but the FBI wants to get to the bottom of it. Did they die from a corrupt cop or cops? In our 6th spot, we have America's secret biolabs. There are a number of secret labs in America that are doing dangerous experiments right now. One that's very concerning is that the lab is working with the world's most dangerous pathogens in biosafety. But no one knows where these labs are, what they're exactly researching on, and where their safety records are. Even more concerning is that vials of bioterror bacteria have gone missing, lab mice infected with deadly viruses have escaped, and wild rodents have been found making nests with research waste. Not only that, but cattle infected in a university's vaccine experiments were repeatedly sent to be killed, and then their meat was sold for us to eat. These labs have also apparently had a number of outbreaks over the years as they're working with diseases like Ebola and bird flu. The government has repeatedly denied knowing the location of these places, and people are concerned that the labs are putting the public at risk. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Brian Laundrie. Last year, people worldwide tuned into the Gabby Petito-Brian Laundrie case. They were hoping for the best, that Gabby would be found safely and would be returned home. Sadly, that wasn't the case. Gabby was found dead, and Brian was the prime suspect. He was on the run for a number of days before his supposed dead body was found. But a number of people are suspicious about this whole case. One of the main reasons being they never revealed if they found a body. I believe it was just parts of his skull and his teeth, or his body was just really badly decomposed. I'm not too sure. But they haven't released a whole ton of information. Although it seems like the case is closed, there's a lot more to it than it seems. Since it is still a fairly recent case, the FBI isn't allowed to disclose all the information that they're currently working on. In our 4th spot, we have the Chicago Strangler. Since 2001, at least 55 black women have been found strangled to death in Chicago. The ways in which they die are very similar. Almost all were killed outside or in abandoned buildings and then left in alleys, dumpsters, and other semi-public places. But to the police, they say this isn't the work of a serial killer. Besides the women being strangled and in similar circumstances, there's nothing else that links them together. Now, due to public pressure, the police were forced to actually review the DNA evidence that they gathered. But the DNA found didn't match each other or anyone in the FBI database, which is weird. It suggests that the killer or killers are very careful, but it could be that there are 2 or 3 people working together to perpetrate these attacks. To this day, we still don't have an answer. In our 3rd spot, we have the Long Island serial killer. On May 2nd, 2010, a woman named Shanann Gilbert called 911 saying that someone was chasing her and trying to kill her. She was from Oak Beach near Long Island. She was going around banging on doors, screaming for help. However, no one answered. She was sadly never heard from again. Months later, a body was found in the area. Police thought it would belong to her, but it didn't. It was actually the body of another young woman. After investigating further, 3 more bodies turned up. That's when they knew that they had a serial killer on the loose. Within a few months, police found the remains of a total of 16 people in the area, at least 10 of whom appeared to have been killed by the same person. Gilbert wasn't found until December 2011. To this day, the killer has never been found. In our 2nd spot today, we have the murder of Jean-Marie Townsend. On the night of September 14th, 1954, Jean-Marie Townsend left a party but never made it home. She was found the next morning strangled by her own scarf. Now, there have been a couple of leads over the years. For example, a man with scratches all over his face apparently gave bloody clothes to the dry cleaner and asked them to clean it, but I don't think this man was ever found. Now, rumor has it that an American soldier was responsible for her death. Again, I don't think he was ever found. found. Shortly after, the area in which she was murdered became known as a murder mile. That's because a number of other young girls in the area claimed that they were also attacked and strangled by their scarves. 2 years later, on September 7th, 1956, a woman named Diana Suttie was also murdered by her scarf and then dumped from a car. Her murder was similar to how Jean-Marie was killed. To this day, her killer has never been found. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the death of Betty Shanks. The murder of Betty Shanks is one of the oldest and most notorious unsolved murder cases in Queensland, Australia. In 1952, Betty was found dead and her body was in terrible condition. There were no suspects and no leads as to what happened to her. Now, one theory was created by Australian historian Lyle Reed. He had been working on this case for many years, and he believes that a policeman actually killed her with his motorcycle and then staged a whole cover-up.
Coming in at number 10, we have the escape from Alcatraz. Now, if there's one place you didn't want to end up if you did something rotten, it's Alcatraz. We've all heard of it, the inescapable island used as a prison for extreme convicts in the USA. That is until June 2nd, 1962, when 3 men somehow did the unimaginable: escape Alcatraz. Brothers John and Frank Anglin, along with Frank Morris, all escaped this island, and to this day, the mystery remains, you guessed it, unsolved. Apparently, they had an arts and crafts club in Alcatraz because the men had made dummies out of plaster, flesh-colored paint, and real human hair designed to make them look asleep. They were pretty good. As soon as guards discovered they were missing, the whole place shut down and they began their search. Fortunately for the investigation, but unfortunately for the guy who got left behind. One of them didn't make it out in time, so he helped fill in the gaps. The group began planning in December and fashioned a makeshift drill out of a broken vacuum and loosened the vents at the back of their cells. After sneaking out through the vents, they ran down a typically unguarded corridor and made their way to the rooftop towards their secret workshop. They used over 50 raincoats to fashion makeshift life vests and a rubber raft to help them cross the shark-infested water surrounding the island. They also built wooden paddles and used a musical instrument as a way of inflating the raft. Navigating through a series of shafts to get to the rear of the cell house, the men then climbed over the fence with their gear and sailed away to freedom. So to be fair, they did find out how the men made their escape, but whether they actually made it remains a mystery. Their plan once they got to land included stealing clothes in a car, but no thefts were made. Since their escape, no trace of them has ever been found. Coming in at number 9, we have the Anthrax Scare. This was a case that the FBI let in right through the front door and still couldn't solve it. Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle had no idea what was about to happen next when he received a letter on October 15th, 2001. Unbeknownst to him, this letter was laced with anthrax, a serious infectious disease. The worst part was he wasn't the only one to receive a letter like this, and 5 people died and 13 people fell ill via these mail attacks. Some even suspect that even more people received these letters but did not fall ill due to the poor quality of the anthrax. The next few years would consist of many lawsuits, and they still had no clear idea of who the culprit might be. That is until Bruce Ivins, a government scientist and suspect, committed suicide. They thought they had him, but even a pool of scientists couldn't confirm that Ivins indeed did it. They still don't know to this day. And coming in at number 8, missing Tammy J. Swicky. Almost 30 years ago, the case of Tammy J remains unsolved and is still undergoing investigation. Investigators hope that by using updated technology, they may be able to uncover new clues regarding her murder. In August of 1992, Tammy's Pontiac was found abandoned on the side of the road, and her body was later discovered in Missouri, 500 miles away. Despite over 200 pieces of physical evidence, they still can't uncover a single trace of who her killer was. The only piece of significant DNA they found was a beer can nearby, but there was no one they could match the DNA to in their criminal database. Even still, the police are unsure as to whether it even relates to the case. The closest they've come to finding the killer was when officers arrested Clark Perry Baldwin, a 58-year-old man they tied to 3 murders and potentially a 4th he committed between Tennessee and Wyoming. But still, in many regards, the murder of Tammy J remains open. The Berkshire UFO sighting. Now we've talked about the cases the FBI couldn't solve, but what about the ones they didn't want to? This is one of the most famous alien abductions the world has ever seen, and no one can really deny it. In 1969, Tom Reed in Berkshire, Massachusetts was riding in the car with his brother, mother, and grandmother. As they were crossing the Sheffield Bridge, they caught sight of some mysterious lights coming up from behind them. Suddenly, the environment changed, and it felt like they were in the middle of the hurricane. Next thing, they remembered they were back in the car, his mother and grandmother had switched places, and realized that over over 2 hours had passed. All they could recall were images of being in a hangar with people around. Several eyewitnesses also saw the lights, and even a few media outlets covered the phenomenon. But what's even creepier is that a memo written by Guy Hoddle, the head of the field office in Washington, wrote a report in 1950, 10 years earlier, that stated that 3 flying saucers were recovered in New Mexico, but the FBI never followed up on it. Could it be that these flying saucers had something to do with the mysterious events of Tom Reed, or was there a reason the FBI didn't give this case the attention it deserved? Guess we won't know, will we? Coming in at number 7, the LaSalle Street murders. There's a lot of murder. I'm sorry guys, but it's here. In 1971, Bob Gurse, Bob Hinson, and James Barker were all found murdered at their home. Their only hint? A bloody footprint left behind. The 3 men all worked together, and considering there were no signs of breaking and entering, the police then assumed that they also knew the murderer. Upon their first interrogations, their primary suspect became Theodore B. Uland, who said he last spoke to Hinson at 9 and Gurse at 9:30. Hinson and Gurse had both worked for him, and police began to suspect that Uland had financial motivations, as he blamed the men for stealing equipment, and that he had a life insurance policy out on his 2 former employees. It was discovered that Hinson, Gurse, and Barker all were notorious parties who left a series of lovers in their wake. It was then considered that perhaps a jealous lover or husband took revenge on the 3 men. They then discovered that one of those women visited the house around 1 AM, but left when there was no answer. The biggest obstacle to this case was the lack of technology, as the police were not equipped with forensics at this time, which meant that the amount of legwork that they were required to do slowed the case down substantially. As a result, the murders remain unsolved. Coming in at number 3, the Hall Mills murder. Investigators initially thought that this 1920s case was a lover's quarrel gone wrong, but no sooner did things get a lot more complicated. In 1922, Reverend Edward W. Hall, who was a pastor in New Brunswick, and Eleanor R. Mills were found murdered. Their bodies were discovered lying side by side, dressed very neatly, near a crabapple tree, a spot considered ideal for lovers. Torn love letters were scattered among their perfectly placed bodies, and they soon found out that the letters were addressed to each other. Both Eleanor and Edward were married, however, so as news of their ardent romance hit the tabloids, the town went wild. The police were confident. They were like, this is easy, we're gonna solve this in 2 days tops. 4 years later, still nothing. His wife was accused, who suspiciously had some of her clothes sent off and re-dyed. His rich brother with a short fuse was a suspect. The only witness was a woman named Jane Gibson, who said she saw 4 people but the crabapple tree after following a suspicious figure around her farm nearby. She then heard a gunshot, followed by screams of a woman. But then her story started changing here and there, and anyways, enough people were accused that they really never got straight down to the story. So I guess sadly, we will never know. Coming in at number 2, the Tylenol Tamperings. This next mystery inspired the phrase, "do not use if seal is broken." The Tylenol murders of 1982 changed the game. 12-year-old Mary Kellerman complained of a sore throat one morning, so her parents gave her 1 extra strength Tylenol. Unbeknownst to them, however, it was laced with cyanide, and sadly Mary passed away. What soon followed was a series of Tylenol-related deaths, all including cyanide poisoning. Fortunately, any bottles containing traces of the substances were removed before anyone else made this deadly mistake, but police still wondered how. The only link they found was a man named James Lewis, who wrote a ransom letter for $1 million to Johnson & Johnson claiming to be the killer, but considering he had no relationship to Chicago, which is where the murders took place, he was instead charged with extortion. But still, police believe that someone must have taken the bottles off the shelves and tampered with them, but the case remains unsolved. And last but not least, we have the Zodiac Killer. If you're a fan of all cases cold, well then you've heard of the Zodiac Killer. I mean, there's a movie about it. Between 68 and 69, the Zodiac Killer chose 7 victims in the northern part of California, and luckily 2 victims survived. This cryptic killer gained notoriety by plaguing investigators with ciphers, threats, letters, and information. The Zodiac even phoned the police and admitted to the killings. He loved the attention and threatened to collect more victims should the police not allow his ciphers to be published. The Zodiac Killer is said to have claimed over 37 lives, though no further victims have been found since 1969. This publicity-obsessed murderer left police chilled and confused, and continues to boggle minds of investigators to this day.